Welcome back to another edition of iSportsman administration video tutorials. Today we're going to talk about validations and its three uses, how to set it up, and I'm going to walk you through step by step every detail about a validation that you possibly want to know. First, let's start off. What is a validation? What are you talking about? A validation is something that an iSportsman administrator can require an account to have before he can do something. Whether that is before he can purchase a permit, he needs a ID validation, or before he can go moose hunting, he needs a moose access validation, or whatever. This can also apply for lotteries as well, which we'll get into later. But let's see what it looks like from the account's point of view first. We'll start it off with, I've already jumped into my account, and I'll show you how I did that. Just come to accounts. I've already added the filter here. I'm just going to my play account here. Two things. You'll see requirements met. This is where all the validations go. You can see I have quite a few. I have validations that span across the different various portals, not just this play portal. This is like a test system we use called Venus. But what you'll do to add a validation to a user's account, you'll come over here, click the Validations tab, and click Add Validation. As you can see, I already have a safety briefing validation, but if I were wanting to add another validation, I could do that here. Let's say I did have my ID validated today. All right, so I'll select the start date, I'll select the end date, so whenever that validation expires and I have to get a new validation, I can set that expiration here. But just to show you, that's where you can add it manually to a user's account. All right, so let's go back into the three uses of a validation. All right, one, ability to see or get a permit. That's a very common use of a validation. And how that's done is basically you can say, all right, before a user can, let's go to our permits. Before a user can buy a certain permit, he has to get his ID validation. Let's just use that as an example. All right, so for this hunting permit, so I went from permit setup to permit schedules, and I'm just going to select here hunting permit, and I'm going to set it to require ID validation. Okay. Now if you scroll down, requirements. In this section you'll see a list of the three different validations that I currently have, and let's select, all right, for this permit they must have an ID validation. Now if you look up here, this check box right here is used as well for those who want to hide a permit. If the user doesn't have that particular validation, they would select this here, and I'll show you what that looks like. Hide this permit if I don't have an ID validation. All right, so I'll click Save. Now I'm going to go to what it looks like, or the page from the user's perspective. Go to my account because I am also a iSportsman user. So as you can see here, this is what you'll see when you log into your profile on your iSportsman account. And now I'm going to try to acquire permits. Okay. As you can see here, I don't see a hunting permit listed, right? So let's go back into the admin section. Let's go back into that hunting permit. Okay. Now I'm going to uncheck that box. So it's not hidden, but it still requires the ID validation. And what this does is it allows me to buy the permit, but then at a later time, here it is, at a later time I can come in, for this particular one I need an endorsement. But what this does is it allows me to add a hunting permit to my account, and I can print it out. And what it will do is I can come in later and bring my ID when I come into the office, and I can show them my ID and then get validated and immediately go out into the field and begin hunting. So that is also an option. So there's two options there. Basically, one, you can hide the permit from the user so he doesn't even see that that permit exists, or you can let him buy the permit first and then later get it validated so then he can begin using it. Okay. So that covers part two as well, the ability to use an issued permit. So if that user were to, if you were to require the hunting permit to need the ID validation, as it currently is. If I try to check in for a hunting activity and I have not got my ID validation, I will not be able to do so because my permit is not valid. Okay, so let's go back. So access to an activity. You can use a validation, you can create a validation and tie it to an activity and say, all right, this activity requires this validation. So how do you do that? How do you do that? You come over to activities, check in, activities, and let's say moose hunting. This is an activity that we have, and as you can see, I kind of already did the work here. I already created the tie-in, and this will be another video that I do. It's called Rule Books. Uses rules, and basically I created a rule that said, all right, so for this activity, it requires me to have this validation, which is called the Moose Lottery winner, which we'll get into the lottery system in a bit. But see, here it requires that validation for me to do this activity. I currently do not have this validation, so this is what it'll look like when I go to try to check in and try to moose hunt. So let's go to check in. Let's select an area here. Alright, see, there's no moose hunting. It's not visible. So I'm going to cancel my check-in and go back to the admin. Where'd you go? Alright, so I'm going to give myself that validation and show you what it looks like when I do. So you go to validations. I'm going to add moose lottery winner. It's good from today. Okay, so it lasts a while there. Well, I guess 3 months. So I'm going to go back. So now I have this validation. So let's see if I can now see it when I try to check in. Check in. Let's select my area. Moose hunting. There we go. So now, as you can see, that's how that works. All right. So let's go back to the admin here. Okay. All right. So those are the 3 uses. Now, if you don't want to manually add, as you can see what I did just then, I manually added that validation by hand to that user's account. But if you have 1,000 validations to give out, you don't want to deal with going into every person's account manually and adding that validation. What is this saying? Okay, all right. So for the most part, you're going to want to automate your validation. And so there's 3 basic main categories that this fits in, and survey validations is one where you can require a user to take a survey, and at the end of that survey, once they hit submit at their last question, they hit submit, it'll automatically grant that user the validation. So when that user goes into his account, he tries to get a permit, he will see that permit, or when he goes to check in, he will see that activity that required that validation. So the 3 different types of automated validations that we offer at iSportsman is the survey validations, where again they take a survey, submit it, and then that grants them access to either purchase or permit or whatever. And a safety brief validation, which typically is used to, there's like a quiz at the end of the safety briefing video, and if they pass it, they get the validation. If they fail it, they do not. Okay, there we go. And then there's the lottery winning validation, where you can tie a validation to the lottery. So if a person wins the lottery, it grants them the needed validation to get the, say, white-tail deer hunting permit, something like that. And of course, we have the manual administrative way of doing it, which you just saw. And then there's one other one, and that is using a validation schedule. All right. So first, before we get into the validation schedule, I want to go into how to set up a validation to begin with. So we go to admin and then validation types, and let's create a new one. And I'll talk about what each field does here. All right, let's call this moose access. All right. Of course, you'll want a unique name that describes what we're talking about. In this case, it's moose access. Now, there's two types of expiration types, and there's one you can set a hard end date. So, what day does that moose access expire? You can also set it to have a number of days from the day that it is issued. So, if you grant somebody access, let's say we want it to last a year, you would type in 365 days. So that'll be 365 days from the day that the user is issued it. Okay. For this particular type of validation, it will not be tied specifically to a permit. But if you were to, let's say if it was a safety briefing, you would want that permit to be invalid or expire if they do not have the safety briefing up to date, validation up to date. So you would click yes for that. All right, grace period. What is grace period? Grace period is used if you want to, let's say, issue permits on a weekend when you know that you will not have staff members there. And let's say a 2-day fishing permit that requires a fishing validation of some sort. You can say, all right, this user can use this validation for 2 days, but then after that, he's going to need to come into the office and get his ID validated or whatever that you require. So that's how the grace period is used, and it's used once. So let's say if we set that to 2 days, the user, if this were applied to a permit, the user will be able to do that activity or have access to that permit for 2 days. Okay, so we're going to set this to 0 for now. User role, you will not need to know what that is. It's something specific to a account approval feature that is automatically set up for those users who do have that feature. So, and then there's the message. This is what is used that if you want to put this on have a permit that requires a validation, this will be a message that is printed on the permit. Let's say this permit is not valid. So until the user, if he doesn't have that validation, this will be printed on his permit if a permit requires this validation. I think I said that right. Okay, so expiration reminder, that's pretty self-explanatory. If you want to send an email reminder to the individual that his moose access is about to expire, like he's at day 364, you want to send him an email reminder saying, hey, your validation is about to expire. You can do that here as well. So that's how you would set up a validation, or you'd create a validation. And then, of course, you would, let's go back to the list here. And then you would see here what either the expiration date is and the description of what type of validation we're talking about. Okay, so now let's talk about, real quickly, validation schedule. For those installations or states that have large classes, like a safety brief orientation class where there's like 100 people that come in and you want to grant them a validation because they have participated and they were present during your orientation, you can do that here. Let's go ahead and create one. This is a schedule for safety briefing. The title is called Safety Brief Schedule. Alright, so we click Save. Now, let's say there's 100 people in this class. We generate these activation codes. Alright, and here they are. What is an activation code? Well, I'll show you. Print preview. This is a piece of paper that can be printed out and cut up into little chunks. You can see each one has its own little activation code. So I need to add some more space here. It's very tight. But as you can see, this little code right here is what you would hand out, or this little slip of paper is what you would hand out to the user at the exit door or whatever. And they would log it. They would take this number and they would log into their account. And actually, let me click Save here before we go back. Done. Let me click Save. Save changes. So now if I were to go into my account, you would see right here there's a spot for me to paste that validation. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Boom. It added that safety brief to my account. And as a user, that's what I do. Each user would have to go in and do that to his own account. So the administrator doesn't have to stand at the door with a computer and validate and add the proper safety brief validation as they're waiting in line to leave. So that is basically it. So we have the three uses. Again, is to see and get a permit, to use a issued permit, and access to an activity. Thanks. I think we're done here, and until next time.